going, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Truth Defender podcast. We are coming to you live in the greatest country in the world, deep in the heart of the Lone Star State, Dallas, Texas. I'm your host, Paul Aguilar. I really appreciate you guys stopping in for another episode. If you guys are checking us out on YouTube and you aren't already a subscriber, please consider hitting that subscribe button as well as clicking on that thumbs up button and turning on that bell icon so you guys don't miss an episode in the future. If you guys are trying to catch us on the go, you can find us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, as well as iHeartRadio at Truth Defender Podcast. We'll have all of our links down below to our website, as well as links to social media, Twitter, Instagram. TikTok is up and running as well for you guys. You want to check us out there. We'll have locals as well and everything else listed beneath. If you guys want to send us an email, ask us any kind of questions, if you have any guests or topic recommendations, you can send us an email at thetruthDefender1776@gmail.com. Our next guest is Mr. Raymond Zamanski, respected scientist, paranormal researcher, author, public speaker. Raymond Zamanski is the leading authority on all things paranormal at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. His award-winning book, 50 Shades of Grays, Evidence of Extraterrestrial Visitation to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and Beyond, takes you deep inside the top secret base that has been linked to government-recovered aliens and their crashed spacecraft since the 1947 Roswell incident. Without further ado, Mr. Raymond Zamanski, how you doing, sir?
Great. Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you taking time out of your busy week. Obviously, Friday is Friday. Everybody wants to be doing, what they want to do, but you're here with us, so we really appreciate it. Yeah, so I reached out to you, obviously, I guess during the week, early last week or early this week. I was really interested in Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Obviously, we've all heard the stories of what might have gone on there in the past. Maybe, like we mentioned, Roswell, the wreckage has always been rumored to have gone there in the past. Could you kind of, I guess, lay out for us how you ended up getting to Wright Pat and how you kind of started there and what your job was there?
Yeah, sure. I went to the University of Detroit and I got a Bachelor of Science degree in Electrical and Electronics Engineering, which I got in 1975. Um, I was the president or the Grand Master of the engineering fraternity there called 2Air. So I had that going for me. I was a member of the National Honor Society in Electrical Engineering called Eta Kappa Nu. So I was not one of those to party, and commuted actually. So I kept my nose to the grindstone, and in fact, I'm probably in the Guinness World Book of Records as the only college student in the history of America who never missed a single class in 5 years of going to university.
Right.
So I'm sure you can find my name if you can spell it. But during that wonderful stretch at university, they had what was called a cooperative education program.
Okay.
And Detroit, where I was living at the time, was not a electrical town. It was a mechanical town. So if you're a mechanical engineer or chemical or civil, you got jobs. But electronics really was just coming into its own in the early 70s. So the United States government in the form of the U.S. Air Force saw the future, and microprocessors were just starting to be thought of, and some mini things, the Trash 80, those kinds of things were coming along. So they were recruiting students to come down and work at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and myself and three other guys that I knew, two, in fact, who have become lifelong friends. They were fraternity brothers, and we all stood up at each other's weddings, and we lived like 5 miles from each other.
Sure.
We're told, hey, come on, you got this job and you'll do this co-op thing. And the way it works is you'd go down for like the January, February, March, April. So you'd go down for 4 months and you would do work study. They would give you a job. You would shadow some senior engineer or mid-level engineer. And then you go back to school for a semester. Then you do another 4 months of work study. And it kind of helped you see what was out there and maybe give you an idea of where you wanted to go and what you wanted to do afterwards. So when I finished a full 12 months of cooperative education, they offered me a job there. And the interesting thing was back in 1973 is when I did my first co-op in January of 1973. I was assigned to a GS-11 by the name of L. And one day Al said, "Hey, look, I'm going to take you out of our building through the adjoining building into a third building, and that's where the greasy spoon was." And as we stepped into this hangar, he says to me, "Have you heard about our aliens?"
Right.
So that's like my first week there working as a co-op student. I'm a college guy. I'd only finished like, 8 semesters. No, it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4 semesters, 5 semesters. And so off I'm going, and the guy's talking to me about aliens. So when I questioned him, he said, "Well, there was a crash out west, and they brought their craft, their machine, I think he called it, and the occupants to Wright-Patterson for examination and evaluation,"
Right.
which was mind blowing.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, it's so I guess I mean obviously just out of college, I mean, how big or how much were UFOs and aliens like in your world at that time? Had you really cared or paid attention to that kind of thing, or was it just kind of,
I was
you know,
still in college. I was big on co-eds and drinking a
yeah,
beer or two on the weekend. So for me, it was quite an evaluation. And I was still in college. I didn't graduate till 75. And this is, January of 1973. Uh, but I went around and, during that session and other co-op sessions, and of course during my career there, I get a sense of whom I could talk to, and I go, "Hey, Al, you know, told me that there were aliens here," and then Doug would go, "Oh yeah, yeah, we got them in the tunnels," and everyone, as time goes on, you found out that everybody knew about Project Blue Book, which was at Wright-Patterson, and Project Blue Book, for all the listeners who may not know, was supposedly an investigation effort by the Air Force to look into, investigate, actually try to find what was really going on with this phenomena. But it was really more of a public relations effort to disinterest the public in what was going on.
right,
But the entire base was well aware that this investigative unit was there, what they were doing somewhat, and there was lots of coverage. So that connection was known from by all base personnel about UFOs. And so when Al was telling me this, I think it was just a mere extension of what he had heard, through the local press and television and that about Blue Book and Wright-Patterson.
sure. Now, I mean, obviously, for a military base, compartmentalization was huge. Obviously, I spent a lot of time in my career when I was in the military. I had several security clearances during my time, but even with all of those, it's always like need to know, right? Like you don't need to know what's going on there. And in this part, you could have all the security clearances you want, but if you're like not a part of that group or whatever, there's like no need for you to know anything. So you can have somebody that's in charge of a department or something. Um, that's all great. You would think they would have access to things, but they just wouldn't. So I mean, is was that kind of a huge? I mean, obviously it was huge, but how much did you actually have access to? You know, during your time there.
Well, people realized that this had to be super top secret.
Right.
And there were really no expectations that you would be read in, especially a young guy. You know, Project Blue Book ended in 1969, effectively the end of the calendar year. And, I showed up and was told this story in 1973. So it was only 4 years after Blue Book closed. So there were still, except for the people that retired, there were still thousands that knew about the connection. And, I always tell people the Air Force would be the worst hide and seek players ever if they allowed a co op student to uncover a secret that they had a 25-year head start on to bury. So, people continued to talk about it. And I knew people who worked at the Foreign Technology Division where Project Blue Book was hosted. So, you always ask those people, but very carefully. And of course, most of the guys that I knew were like, computer scientists or electrical engineers. They really, if there were aliens, for example, they, would have to be more biologists, physiologists, that sort of thing. But if you think about it, you mentioned something, I really want to clear this up for the audience. there is no doubt that what was recovered at Roswell came to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And how do we know that? Well, Major Jesse Marcel was the guy who was assigned by the Roswell Air Force Base, Army Air Force Base commander in July of 1947 to go to the Foster Ranch, 70 miles north of Roswell, and pick up the debris. He was also the same guy that was told, you're going to escort this to the 8th Army Air Force headquarters in Fort Worth, which he did, and which he later talked all about in a taped interview with Stanton Friedman. And he talked about how they tried to cut, burn, scratch, hammer this material and how it was not of this earth. Then you had, oh, and he also said the material went to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So who would know better than the guy who brought it in? And then the guy who was responsible for shipping it out was General Thomas Dubose, who was chief of staff down there in Fort Worth, which is in your backyard. And that material came in and it was shipped. And in a signed affidavit, which is a legal document, after Dubose, who was a general after he got out of the Air Force, he signed a legal document and he said, that material went to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Whatever that material was, there is no doubt whatsoever that it went to Wright-Patterson. And ironically enough, the first laboratory that would have looked at it would have been the materials laboratory, which in 1947 would have been there for 30 years because it was established in 1917. So being an aerospace materials laboratory, it would have been flown in. And, the pieces, they weren't massive. Thousands of pieces were collected and they were only 2 inches by 3 inches. And the biggest piece anyone ever documented was about 2 foot by 3 foot. So you could bring this in a box or a briefcase, just walk it into the materials directorate, meet with the director and go, hey, we need some of your help. And we can't tell you what this is because we don't know. We can't tell you where we got it because that's secret. But get your guys to get their machines and all their knowledge. And we got plenty of this stuff. So do what you need to do and characterize it. If you can do an elemental analysis on it, but tell us what you know about it because we think this is special material.
Right.
So that would have been done all at Wright-Patterson.
Yeah. I mean, even if it was brought in bigger cases, like we mentioned, need to know is extremely important. I mean, you even had instances of Senator Goldwater trying to get access to all that information, and even he was turned down. So like it wouldn't matter if it was just somebody working in a lab somewhere, like somebody that just worked on the base. I mean, they obviously would definitely not have a chance to get in there. I mean, it would just be one of those things. It's crazy. I mean, I've flown into Wright-Pat maybe twice, I think, in my time. I've never been into any of the buildings, just like on the tarmac, whatever. But say something were to come in that was big, that in a sense that it was like alien material, would there be kind of a buzz around base? Would people know if something were to come in like that? I mean, obviously,
no, absolutely not. And that would be up to the people whose job it was to handle it. Again, if you think about the Roswell crash wreckage, and then I'll talk about the aliens in just a minute.
Sure.
The material was small, and they had. Do you know what a carry-all is?
Sure.
It's a military, right? It's a big truck, kind of a jeepy thing. Well, both Marcel and his cohort, another intelligence officer from Roswell Army Airfield, they each filled a carry-all of that material. They collected thousands of pieces and brought it back, and they showed it to Colonel Blanchard, who was the base commander. And Blanchard declared it a crash disk, and the world went crazy. But all that material, again, there were thousands. That's what Marcel said, thousands and thousands of pieces. And remember, he took some of that home with him for a while, and he showed it to his son. And that story went on. His son went to his grave. Dr. Marcel went to his grave saying, I saw it. I saw the stuff on it and, the hieroglyphics and whatever. So when Thomas, let me put this in perspective, it would have been guarded so well that Thomas DuBose went on record when he signed the affidavit, and you can find his affidavit online. There was a general who was the deputy commander of SAC. I think his name was LeMay. And again, look online, you'll find it. In the affidavit, he said that LeMay, who was his boss in Washington, D.C., told him, this classification of what you're doing right now is more important than the atomic bomb. So everybody in that chain of command was sworn to secrecy. And so no buzz would have entailed. And the same thing, there would have been a buzz if they needed a C5 and they're bringing these cases off that are as big as 707s. No, it's just simply a briefcase. Could have been a guy in plain clothes, somebody just nondescript. They make a few phone calls. They say, hey, we're coming in. We got some material. So nobody knows to the last minute. And even through the whole process, whoever brought the material in was under no obligation to tell the director that this is top secret, and I'm sure they would have. But just needed the Secretary of the Air Force to call that lab guy and go, look, I got some guys coming in. Some stuff fell off the truck. You're going to evaluate it. When it's all over, they're going to swear you to secrecy, and you're never going to talk about it again. And you're not going to write a tech report except one copy for them. So really, and the research and the books and everything show that secret didn't come out for 30 years. That there was even a Roswell, a real recovery, did not come out until 1978. So you've got 31 years in between.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, nobody would know. There's a lot of stuff that goes on like that, but
Nobody would know. And that was just small
yeah,
stuff. You could move it around in a briefcase.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it makes sense. We have a question here from one of our viewers, Ray. He asked if you ever met an individual by the name of Clifford Stone.
I know of Clifford Stone, and I've heard some of his stories, and I've never researched them. I haven't read any of his stuff, but I know he's a former Air Force guy, and he makes all these claims. But I can't render any kind of opinion on his work. I haven't studied it whatsoever.
Sure. Oh yeah,
He's just a name out there, just doing talks on the UFO cocktail circuit.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, so I think I never heard the name, but I think now that you mentioned that, I think I had heard something of him, like, in passing before. But yeah, so I want to get to kind of like, so you get to the base and you start out, Al lets you know that there's aliens, things like that. Now, you mentioned that everybody had always spoken about they were in the tunnels, like in the tunnels. Did like anything ever come out of that? Did you ever see the tunnels or anything like that?
There are tunnels all over the base, and people should not be surprised by that.
Sure.
For example, we have a university here called Wright State University where I did my graduate work in computer engineering, and the entire campus, every building is connected to every other building through a series of tunnels. And the reason is during, we get some nasty ice storms through here as well as you guys do. And it's great because you can go in and all the classes are in session. You step onto campus in a snowstorm and you go, oh my God, there's not a soul here. Well, they're all underground. They're in the tunnels. Well, that kind of thing happens at Wright-Pat. There are buildings that have tunnels for heat ducts and electricity and those types of things, utilities. There are some buildings that are across like a busy street from each other, and there are connecting tunnels underneath. And in those hallways of those tunnels are vaults. Nobody should be surprised that a base that does super top secret work has tunnels and has vaults and that sort of thing. That can't be a surprise. Now, whether or not there's aliens in there, I'll be honest with you and your audience. I'm 1,000% sure that whatever crashed in Roswell, the materials, the wreckage, came to Wright-Patterson. Of that, there is no doubt.
Sure.
But I've always been a little bit squishy on the recovery of aliens, and here's why. The testimony, the witness testimony on aliens, you don't find a lot of strong stuff from a military member. It's always, Frankie Rowe, whose uncle was the fireman, the guy who was the uh, he was the undertaker, a guy in the hospital, but they're all civilians. Whereas with the crash wreckage, you have got a, a general who has no obligation nor no gain by admitting that the materials he handled and he said were otherworldly went the right path. The same thing with Jesse Marcel, but neither of those mentioned anything about alien bodies. And I can tell you, if there were alien bodies on that same airplane with Jesse Marcel, he'd have said us something about that in 1978, but he never did. He said, alien bodies. Same thing with the general. So for me, I'm unconvinced that alien bodies were recovered in Roswell. Not saying it's not possible, but there's just not that same strong story. And one other point, some of the people who wrote the books on Roswell, and I'm exempting Stanton Friedman from this list, in a lot of their other books, they were caught in lies and fabrications. And despite the fact that a lot of their stuff was true, the fact that they fabricated stuff and were later outed on it puts all of their research, in my opinion, in question.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of rough. I mean, I know personally speaking with other members in the military and things like that, it's hard to kind of pry anything out of them. I mean, you have a lot of stuff that they have to be responsible for, like other military members, their careers or families. They don't want to lose their pensions. They don't want to lose their jobs, especially if they're commissioned. Even a service member that's been in that's an enlisted member that's been in like more than 10 years. Obviously, they're going career, but there's just nobody willing to kind of stick their neck out for anything really, unless there's something to gain from it, which for the most part there isn't. Yeah, it's rough, but I mean, I heard you speak about previously the foreign technology division, which was labeled as that back then. Now it's NASIC. What kind of role did they play on the base? Like, what were the things that they were handling at that time?
Well, NASIC and formerly FTD, they were responsible for collecting and evaluating any kind of weaponry from our adversaries so that we could prepare to defend against them or defeat them or whatever we do with it. So anything that fell from the sky that we couldn't readily identify, it was their job to collect it. And then for the most part, they really didn't have in-house experts.
Right.
Maybe a photo expert, photoshops. But what they did is they would take it to a place like the materials laboratory or the other laboratories, which were on the other side of the base. Wright-Patterson originally had 4 different geographic spaces, despite the fact that they all abutted each other or were across a major road from each other. You had A, B, C, and D. Then up until a couple of years ago, you had A, B, and C, and now it's only A and B, where A is like the operational side. That's where FTD was, strangely. But the tech side, where all the labs were and all the development stuff and all the engineering types, were in area B. So if FTD found something like the crash wreckage and it went to Wright-Patterson, it would have been taken via FTD, would have made a stop there logically, and then gone on to the materials directorate, because FTD would go, oh, well, we know a guy who's expert in metallic materials, and so we'll start with him because we want to limit the people who know about this evaluation. That said, because there is no record of that material coming on base and what happened to it, the people in Washington, D.C. may have already known about the materials directorate and cut FTD out of the loop, because that's less people that know about it. And so they could have just gone, hey, we're high powered. We got a high powered guy playing suits, knock on the door. Hey, you're the lab director, materials directorate. pop open a suitcase and go, "We've been sent here by the Secretary of the Air Force. Here's our letter of introduction. And by the way, don't tell FTD about this because they're a bunch of clowns." And that is entirely possible. The fewer people who know, the better.
Yeah, it's definitely the fewer, the better. Um, yeah, so like, kind of curious as to, I mean, obviously you mentioned that when you started working there, obviously UFOs and aliens were the furthest thing from your mind at that time. I mean, you hear these stories first week that you're there. Over time, do you start seeing, I guess, proof that kind of starts leading you to believe in UFOs or like in aliens? Um, Even to up to this point, was there any kind of like strong evidence that you ever saw that you would be like, oh, well, there's actually aliens or there's actually other creatures that are coming from another world? Was there anything like that?
Well, I got interested in the topic, and for the first couple of years after I got on base, it was like, oh, an interesting thing to talk to people that, I don't know, they identified themselves somehow with a statement. You go, oh, well, I can talk to them about UFOs. Then you raise a family, you have kids, you're coaching,
Yeah.
you're traveling, that sort of thing. But then 1997 rolls around, and the Phoenix Lights happen.
Okay.
And I had a contract with Arizona State University. Among many contracts, I had maybe 5 or 6 I was managing at the time,
Sure.
and they were all working on problems that were related. And we used to meet quarterly as a big team. But I had a guy there, and then when that happened, I kind of snooped around on one of my trips down there, and talked to people about what had happened and that sort of thing. And so that really got me back to reading books and articles and doing research. And, the internet comes along, and now you've got all this stuff going on where you can, uh, you know, do instant searches. And, it's just
Yeah.
a wonderful thing rather than going to the library. And then in about 2008, as I was traveling, I got more into it, and I started to do the boots on the ground thing where I wanted to find out if there was anything to this UFO thing at all, because I'd been there for 30 some years and I heard all this stuff about UFOs and extraterrestrials. And so I started with the premise that right in the middle, I don't care if there's UFOs or there are no UFOs. I just wanted to go, is there some truth to this?
Right.
So I picked cases as time went along for me to jump into. And I went to these locations and I tried to find people who were witnesses or knew the stories. And I studied these things intently. And that was the Exeter, September of 1965. It was Travis Walton case, and it was the Rendlesham case.
Right.
And in each instance, for example, I went to Exeter and I went to the site where Norman Muscarello and the 2 officers, Hunt and Bertrand, stood in a field, and a 90-foot UFO hovered 100 feet over their heads. And this was documented in a book called Incident at Exeter. Well, it turns out that when I went looking for people, now this is 2008, the thing happened in 1965, I found the son
Okay.
of the man who owned the house and the field in which those people were standing in. And Arthur Russell was his name. His father, Clyde, owned the house, and Clyde was made famous in the book Incident at Exeter by John Fuller. So I got to talk to Arthur, and Arthur introduced me to a neighbor who owned the adjoining farm and was able to corroborate a story that was put forth by the officers in Norman, that they heard the horses kicking in their stalls that night when the UFO was hovering. So I
Wow.
was able to actually talk to the guy who owned that paddock in which
Right.
those horses were, and he told me, yes, they had destroyed. They just were going nuts in there because whatever the UFO was emitting, maybe some high pitched sound. So I did that for Exeter. I talked to Colonel Halt and John Burroughs for the Rendlesham incident, and I spent an afternoon and evening with Travis Walton at the site of his abduction.
Okay.
So I talked to all the firsthand witnesses, and then I went to Rendlesham. I flew to England and I went to the Air Force Base and I did my snooping around and I talked to people and I talked to folks who claimed that, they were witness to one thing or another. So my starting in the middle and not caring which way the needle went, turns out that the more I investigated, the more the needle kept going, oh man, there was something here, or that means there's a lot of crazy people in this world. So the deeper I dug, the more evidence I found that there's something going on here.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely always better to kind of figure it out on your own. You just sometimes you have a lot of people that want to believe in it, and they just want to believe in it so much that they find UFOs and everything, or they find aliens and everything. But when you kind of experience it for yourself, I've never had any kind of experience with UFOs or anything like that. It would be nice to see one, but it's just never happened. But I mean, another one of the topics that's obviously big. Um, I remember you mentioned that you had an experience with what you thought was a man in black. Could you kind of go over that whole story again for us?
Oh yeah, this is fun. I'm playing golf at a golf course that's on the Air Force Base on Wright-Patterson,
Mm.
and the 10th hole parallels the FTD campus.
Okay.
And on the side of the golf course that is closest is a parking lot that the members, that the FTD personnel park in. And one day there was a gentleman out there. It was pretty hot. It was like late May. And when we get into late May in Dayton, it can get really, really muggy and hot. We're, generally in the mid 80s, and we could have 75% humidity. So it can get nasty. So I see this guy out there, and I strike up a conversation. He is unusually dressed because that time of year, nobody would go out in black clothes and a black hat. You just wouldn't do it. You would leave your head inside. So I strike up the conversation with the guy and mention to him that, hey, you know, you're standing outside of an intelligence building and you're obviously an intelligence guy of some sort, but you look just like a man in black. And suddenly I'm thinking, they got to hang out somewhere during the day. But I told him, I said, man, you're striking me as a man in black. And I tried to strike a deal with him, take his photo and that sort of thing. And of course, he didn't want to hear it. He said, that's a pretty bad idea. But that was my first man in black encounter. And I actually wound up having two conversations with him. I tried to convince him again to let me take his photo. And he was like, no, I don't think so. Uh, so that was the one that I wrote about in the book. And he was out there having a smoke. And when I told him, I said, in the second meeting, I said, the thing that really struck me is it's hot out. And now we're like another 4 weeks later. So it's even hotter. And I said, why are you wearing that hat? Now he's standing in the shade because there's trees all around that area. And he takes his hat off as if to like appease me and make me feel better about this thing. Like, well, I'll show you that I'm not a man in black. And then he's got this strange olive skin.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah.
thought, man, if you thought taking your hat off was going to make me feel better, it didn't. It even made me more suspicious because, the last time I saw a complexion like that was in Italy.
Okay.
So, he just had that skin tone. So it was really strange. And that was my on base encounter with, somebody who could be the Men in Black.
Was there, I guess, ever talk from, I guess, other people you worked with or other people on the base that there were like actual men in black on the base or anything like that, like in passing? Was that ever anything?
Right. Some guy um, told me he read my book
Yeah.
and my email address is in the back of the book. So he sent me an email and he said, I want to let you know that I work in FTD and I saw the guy that you were talking about. And he said, yeah, he's scary. And he dresses like that every day,
Hmm.
every day. And I thought, all right, like if you're going to put somebody on, you do that for a week maybe, and people, they grin and they wink you. But he goes, every day this guy is dressing like a Men in Black, and I go, well, I rest my case, man.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's if he was playing a trick on everybody, he's extremely committed to that.
He was
For
committed.
years and
That's the
years.
word. He
Yeah,
was
years and years.
he was committed.
Yeah, that's
Or
crazy.
maybe it gets him attention that he doesn't otherwise garner. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's I mean, I guess it's fun to think hopefully he's not screwing around with everybody, but um, that you actually met one. But yeah, I mean, that's a cool story. It's kind of a I mean, you obviously only hear stories and you don't really hear too many stories about them, but obviously they show up wearing the suit and the hats, maybe like a big trench coat or whatever. But besides that, yeah, that's extremely weird. I remember one of the things also you had discussed was the fact that everybody always talks about Hangar 18 and like all these hangars where they have, I guess crafts inside. I mean, I maybe at one point there's actually been warehouses that maybe they have like a 18 on the outside or something, but was there any kind of truth to any of those things like that?
I think Hangar 18 is a conceptual idea that people can just relate to because there's over 600 buildings on base.
Wow.
It's spread out over 8,000 acres. And there are a lot of hangar looking buildings. Mostly they're hangars. That's why. None actually have 18 on it per se, but numbers on those buildings can and do change. Like they'll put a, they'll refurbish it, repaint a building, and a new organization will move in. They'll gut it, put new offices in, and they'll renumber the building. The original building I worked in was building 22. That's no longer the number. It's been renumbered.
Wow.
So it's possible that in the past there was, but I think it's just a concept. I actually do a whole talk about hunting for Hangar 18, and I really don't want to get into that now.
For
You
sure.
might be able to find a former interview or something that I did out there that does that, but I think it was just a concept. And again, recall the Roswell crash wreckage description. It's small stuff, 2 inches by 3 inches. You don't need a hangar, and
Right.
and of course, you wouldn't keep it in a hangar. Maybe overnight. Let's say it got late and you couldn't get into the materials directorate or the other labs there to have start your process. So you pull in that little bomber, the B-29, that's got a couple of suitcases in it. You pull it into the hangar for safe storage overnight. You lock it up in the morning. You come back. You get the stuff out and you walk it, or somebody escorts you to the next building. So hangars aren't required. And as far as the alien thing, again, supposedly, and again, I'm squishy on the whole alien thing. These things required child caskets, and
Mm.
and that's like 4 foot or 6 foot or whatever, so they're pretty small. Again, you could put them in an office space. You don't really need a hangar for that.
Right.
And I think it's a red herring. Hangar 18 is pretty much a red herring, and that's really all I could say for now because no one's really identified it. And I have great ideas, but it's beyond the scope of this hour.
Right, right. No, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I guess that would kind of fall along the lines as well. I mean, earlier I mentioned Barry Goldwater. That he had tried to get access, and he had tried to get access specifically to the Blue Room as well, but that kind of fall in the same area as well. It's just kind of a rumor, or maybe somebody had heard something about it as well.
It could be just a symbolic thing. They call
Right.
it the blue room. It's a wink, wink. I'm going to the blue room, and
Yeah.
nobody's supposed to know what that is. But what you would probably have, in FTD, would be pencil pushers who are waiting for the report to come back from the labs. Because again, at that time, early on in 47, they were just the collectors, and they had limited scientific capabilities, within the building, but the base had all those other labs going for them. Propulsion lab and materials directorate and human factors and whatever else they had back then. So they would have consulted them as the experts, and materials lab is the guy. They're the guys who would have done it, and somewhere deep in their bowels, is buried, that 1947 Roswell report. I know it is. I feel it in my bones. But whether it's going to ever see the light of day, it's another question.
Sure. Yeah, it's so. I mean, obviously, the base has expanded a lot since you first started there up until now. Like you mentioned, there's always somebody that's moving in or out. You said how many buildings were on there
Over
currently?
600.
Yeah. Okay. So it's. I mean, uh, the base has obviously been famous for like UFOs and stories of UFOs and aliens, things like that. But I mean, was there ever anything else that you had heard of that wasn't related to like any of those topics that kind of really stuck out in your mind at that time or anything like that?
Regarding what?
I mean, we've all. I mean, I've obviously heard stories that there's like an Air Force museum there that's supposed to be haunted or like any kind of like weird
Oh,
craziness and things like that.
oh, that's a great question. That's a great question. First of all, the Air Force Museum is there. No, I've never heard it's haunted.
Right.
However, that said, um, years ago when the ghost hunters, and the particular year escapes me, but the ghost hunters,
Mhm.
the guys, they were called TAPS, the
Right. Right.
Atlantic Paranormal. Okay, the guys who mega known for this stuff. They came and did a 3-night investigation on the base in 3 different buildings, 4 actually. I think they did 4 buildings, and one of the buildings is building 219, and that was one of the buildings that they didn't get any readings. But in 1947, building 219 was the regional hospital on the base, and it's only seconds by a car, a mere less than a minute from the flight line and the hangars.
Right.
So if a plane came in with aliens, they would have checked in through building 219 because it was the hospital, and they would have had doctors and nurses and equipment, and they could bring guys on shift work. Come on in, let's bring it in at night. No one's going to see the little caskets coming in. That building is reputedly haunted, and there are not only newspaper articles in the Air Force Base's own newspaper that document high ranking military and high ranking civilian and medical personnel as seeing apparitions, hearing disembodied voices. We could go on for another whole show about this, but I discovered the woman who was quoted in the newspaper article, which was printed like in 1997. She worked there every night. She was a cleaning lady. I found that cleaning lady's granddaughter. And when I interviewed her, she told me she used to go in with her grandmother almost every night and play around the building with her friend while her grandmother did her rounds. And that young girl had experiences.
Sure.
So I was able to find a witness who corroborated what her grandmother had told the reporter when they wrote the story in the base newspaper about the building she worked in. And it was just the most awesome thing. And I actually brought this woman on. Now she's grown and has children. I have brought her on a couple of shows, and we did a haunted Wright-Pat thing. And it was
Wow.
just super cool because she was a witness, and she not only corroborated stuff that her grandmother, because I had the articles and I let her read it, but she had stuff happening to her and her friend, which went on beyond what had happened to her grandmother. So yeah, there has been some, and there's 2 other buildings that the ghost hunters found evidence of it being haunted.
Sure. Yeah. It's definitely. And I always wondered. I mean, I used to work during my time when I was in the military back in the day. I used to work on I guess, like a nuke house, what they would call it. So they would train submariners and such. So we had, like a bunch of nuclear reactors and things like that. There's only 2 of them in the whole country. One of them is down in Charleston, South Carolina, and then the other one's up in New York, somewhere like in closer to Boston, I think, um, somewhere in that area. But um, it was kind of a weird place, considering that it was a military base. But it was like out in the middle of the woods, and they'd always hear stories about things that all kinds of people would see. And I had always wondered if it was maybe related to the fact that we were so close to nuclear reactors. Obviously, um, being on an Air Force base, if there ever was any kind of spaceships or anything like that that were brought in, obviously they'd have like radiation leaking off of them that could cause, like for other people to see things or they experience things. I mean, I had always kind of been on that kind of side that maybe that was the case, but if there ever was any kind of alien spaceships, I mean, I'm sure it would cause hallucinations and people that work there, cause for them to see things. Was there ever kind of incidences? Obviously, they had a hospital on the base, but where you would hear stories of people falling ill or anything like that. It's like,
That those stories never reached me, but at one time there was a nuclear reactor on the base, a small nuclear reactor. And if you look at certain databases, like I would recommend you go to the National UFO Reporting Center, the New Fork one, and there are entries in there about UFOs being spotted over Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
right.
So if you go to New Fork, maybe type in Wright Pat or Dayton, it'll get you there. But I think you can do a direct query and find a Wright Pat. But those were I don't think they're modern settings. I think they were more like in the 50s, maybe the 60s. And I can't remember the exact dates that the nuclear reactor was active, but it was being used in a research program. And then it was shut down and mothballed, and they filled it with concrete and whatever else they do to insulate it. The building is still there, and it's still being monitored for leakages and all that stuff. But not that there is any, but there was that nuclear presence at Wright-Patterson, which, if the dates coincide, might be reason for them to visit. And there was nuclear weapons stored at Wright-Patterson. That's not a secret.
Sure.
There were for many years we had SAC there, and there was a nuclear storage facility, which is gone. But that would give the visitors a reason to come give us a look see, as they have all over the country and all over the world.
Sure. Yeah, I was just going to come up with that as well. It's always, I guess, kind of one of those cases you hear stories about nuclear sites that they have UFOs hovering over the base and they kind of flicker with with a nuke system. Like, they go active, then they go back to their state how they were before, and then they flick them back on as So
Malmstrom Air Force Base, right?
yeah, right.
Salas, Captain Salas, he says they shut them all down, shut all
Yeah,
10 missiles down.
yeah. It's definitely one of those things. I guess and it seems to be only that it's nuclear weapons for some reason, which is kind of scary. But at the same time, if they're trying to stop us from killing ourselves, that would be a good thing. But yeah, it's definitely is. I guess is Ohio kind of a hotbed for UFO activity, other than like the actual Air Force base? Is it kind of like a hotspot for UFOs?
Well, in my second book called Victoria's Secret Truth, it's a 2-year case study of a family that's had contact, Victoria, since childhood, and relatives that, with entities that she describes variously as tall insectoids, um, grays, both, the small and the tall grays. And just north of Cincinnati was a place called Fernald. And Fernald is famous because it was the largest cleanup in the history of the EPA. Fernald was a plant that created nuclear products for nuclear weapons. And Fernald wound up putting over 1 million pounds of nuclear waste into the atmosphere, the water, and the ground. And Victoria grew up only several miles due east of that plant, which means that when the prevailing winds out of the west blew, it blew nuclear radiation over her home. And worse, her mother worked in that nuclear facility where it was proven that the workers were exposed to high levels of radiation while her mother was carrying Victoria in her belly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, is it and there are films that you can find on the internet that have been validated of a UFO hovering over that facility. It's a famous story. And so, why wouldn't they be interested in somebody like Victoria and abducting her to see how maybe human beings are reacting to high levels of radiation, and then make her part of the hybridization program to see, how will that affect us? You know, should we stay away uh, from humans who've had this high exposure?
Right.
So Ohio has had more than its share. Plus, we had nuclear facilities up in the Cleveland area. They're always buzzing those things,
Sure.
uh, all up and down. And in my first book, I mean, in my second book, in Victoria's Secret Truth, I talk about all the nuclear facilities, all the way from all up and down I-75, from that Fernald plant all the way up to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and all the sightings that were all, the UFOs were seen, the Mound plant. I mean, this was just, this South Central Ohio was so deep into the nuclear stuff. It was amazing. It's amazing they didn't land on our lawns. We had so much going here.
Yeah.
And all that's documented in Victoria's Secret Truth.
Yeah. It seems to be more, you'd see more action in those areas, especially when it comes to nuclear, any kind of material. Um, so it's kind of a weird thing. So, I mean, obviously, do you still have access to the base? Do you still go back and forth, or are you done with that now?
Well, I have my retiree's pass,
Right.
and I go on the base. I play golf. It's COVID, so
Sure.
we stopped our travel. We used to try to get out for a week or two to Florida and visit relatives at different times of the year. But we've been trying to be as careful as we can, and just can that stuff. So. Yeah, usually, and they closed the gym. I used to be a gym rat. I'm a
Mm.
former marathoner. I ran 16 marathons,
Oh,
two
nice.
Bostons, including in those, dozens of other races. I was the wellness director on the base for a couple of years, and my job was to improve the wellness of all 10,000 civilians on the base. And I had to be a good example. So I was always in the gym working out and, checking up on people that were in classes and just being available during, my spare time, that sort of thing. And in fact, I just bought a set of those, weights where you uh, spin a dial and then a
Oh, they
different
come
weight
off.
appears.
Right.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
adjustable. I just brought it home today,
Okay.
and I
Awesome.
just said, because the gym's closed, it's been like 2 years now, and I just said, well, it could be 4 years. So
Sure.
I got a treadmill, I got an order track, I've got other resistance bands and tubes here. It's just like, here comes winter, and
Yeah.
I want to come out stronger. So yeah, I guess I haven't told the wife yet. She doesn't know they're down under the pool table.
Uh-oh. Maybe walking around with them. Just, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
By the way, I got some weights. Sorry.
Really casual.
Yeah.
Like, oh, look at what showed up in my hands.
Yeah. I mean, we got, like, obviously we all work from home. So, during the day, we're home all day, but I had to get one of those like under the desk ellipticals just to kind of stay busy, like I'm walking and stuff. Cause I mean, sitting here at the desk all day, every day, it gets kind of rough. So,
Oh, it does.
anything you can do to stay in shape, it works.
Get some resistance tubes and bands,
Sure.
and you can get different tensions on them. I get black ones, blue ones, whatever, and you can do a gym in a bag with those. You
Yeah.
can really exercise a lot of stuff, and that's, in fact, we had a program called Gym in a Bag. We had an expert come in and teach classes, and then their reward was they got a baggie with an instruction booklet which was printed, and tubes and bands, and a lot of people would then just work out at their desk, even pre-COVID a decade ago, because if they were too busy to go to the gym, you're just stretching out, you're reading your email, and you can work out. Great stuff.
Yeah. 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 That's exactly what we do. I have a set of dumbbells around here. So I'm on the elliptical when I'm not too busy doing some, whatever, but just trying to keep the blood pumping. So
Good for
that's all,
you.
that's all that matters. But yeah, I mean, so I guess kind of as we wind down here, how many books do you actually have out currently?
I have 3 books out. They're under the Alien Shades of Grays
Right.
trilogy. The first one that was 50 Shades of Grays, I decided to change it to make it more in line with the topic inside, because
Okay.
some people might be confused about that porno thing,
And
you
the
know?
silent movie.
So yeah, when I got the second book done, we changed the franchise to Alien Shades of Grays, and I need to do a short plug. You can find
Sure.
it on you can find it on Amazon,
Right.
and just look up Alien Shades of Grays UFO, and I'll pop up. Or if my name shows up on your website,
Yeah.
Szymanski. But in March, I've been invited to be a speaker at the UFO Mega Conference,
Ooh, nice.
and it's March. I really need to memorize this. It's March 19th through the 27th at Bally's in Las Vegas. And the rooms during the week are cheap. It's like 69 bucks a night for a room if you tell them you're doing the conference. And I think the 2 weekend nights might be 99 bucks, goes up a little bit. But I'm going to be a speaker there. I'm hoping they'll also let me maybe do a special session, you like an extended session.
Sure.
So I'll be there. The schedule, you can find it when it comes out. Just Google UFO Megacon,
Right.
and it probably won't show up until probably mid to late January, because
Setting it
excuse
up
me,
and yeah.
they're still signing everyone to contracts. But if I can tell you, your audience, why I think
Sure.
this is great. I was a speaker there a couple of years ago. They treated everybody like gold. They want the speakers to mingle with the crowd. So when they have 2 banquets, dinners that we get to go to, they don't want us sitting with our researcher buddies. They want one researcher per table, and they want you to break bread with the people who paid the money to come through the door. So that's the first thing I loved about them. The second thing is unlike most conferences where a guy will give a talk or a gal will give a talk, and then they disappear maybe to the expo and do books for an
Mhm.
hour or two and you never see them again. You could walk into the lecture hall at any one time and find 10 speakers sitting in the chair, supporting and listening to the other speakers. It was just super unique that way. And I thought, this is great because, then there's a break and then people see you in the crowd and they want to talk to you. I found it to be a superior experience. Just it was just fantastic. So love to see you all out there. I don't know what they're charging to get through the door, but it's a lot of days.
Right.
That's like 9 days or something. There's gonna be a lot of speakers and workshops, and there's a lot of big names there. And I know I'm not one, but that's okay. I've
Understand.
got a unique thing. I'm gonna be doing an extended talk on swamp gas my ass, and that's the latest book. That's the third book, and
Yeah.
it is the true story of the 1966 Michigan swamp gas UFO. I
Okay.
got a pilot to break his silence after 55 years and tell me his story, and I have all of his military records, and I have the memoirs of the guy who flew with them that day to corroborate the story. So it's Swamp Gas My Ass is the last book in Alien Shades of Gray's trilogy.
Right. So that can be found on Amazon. Do you this so does the website does do those carry your books as well, or is that just kind of a like information wise or anything like that? Is
I have a very minimalistic website because I don't
right.
make my living doing this. I just
Sure.
have a place where people can drop me a message if they can't find me. They don't know my email is itsa UFO at yahoo.com. That basically says it's a UFO at yahoo.com, and they can email me, and I generally get back to people, unless it's something crazy, in a couple of days.
Sure, sure. Yeah, so we'll actually have all the links for the books down in the description as well as the email address and the website if anybody wants to go to it. Also, be looking out. I'll actually add links to the UFO Mega Conference as well. So if
Beautiful. And I
anybody,
can send you some material.
sure, sure, yeah, we can always put it up there in the show notes. And even when we add the promos and everything, we can go ahead and put that out. But March 19th to the 27th in Vegas,
At
UFO.
Bally's.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's the Valley's UFO Mega Conference in March of next year. So we'll have all those links listed down below for everybody to take a look at, with the websites and the email address as well. Everybody pick up a book. That would be great. Mr. Zamanski, I really appreciate your time, sir. Like I mentioned, you could have been anywhere else in the world, but you chose to be here with us, and we appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It was a real
Yeah,
pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
absolutely. Yeah, I enjoyed it a lot more. I can guarantee it. For everybody else, I appreciate you guys stopping in. Everybody that's been watching us live on YouTube, I got to all your questions. Hopefully, everybody, for the most part, out here in Texas. Um, Brunson's out there in Charleston, South Carolina. How's it going, everybody? So, everybody, make sure you guys stop in. We'll have this episode up and running. I want to say tomorrow, edited with all the show notes and links to everything, so everybody can check out the books and the websites. Um, if you guys are watching us on YouTube, make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you aren't already a subscriber. Hit that like button and the bell icon so you guys don't miss an episode in the future. If you're catching us or you want to catch us on the go, as I mentioned before, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio at Truth Defender Podcast. All of our links to our social media will be down below as well. Like I just mentioned, we just got TikTok up and running for advertisement as well. And if you guys want to shoot us an email for whatever reason you want to ask our guest a question or myself, topic recommendations, you can shoot us an email at thetruthDefender1776@gmail.com. I really appreciate you guys. Next week is Thanksgiving, so I'm not sure if we'll have anything set up for next week. But you guys can shoot me an email or anything if you guys want to chat about something. So if you guys, we don't see you guys next week, everybody have a safe Thanksgiving. Everybody stay safe out there, stay blessed, and most of all, stay frosty.
Perfect.